Let's pick up where we left off in the previous module. In our last example, we saw how to turn a city block into a point cloud, as we'll eventually need them to be. I wanted you to see an example of what we're actually working towards, but I did leave out a few extra steps. Right now, I want to roll back a little bit and include those steps. Let's jump back into our city block sim. And the point we're going to pick up from is going to be this dop import node. So we're going to put a few steps in between there and these bits. Let's do that. Currently, we're visualizing only our points, which is the last node. We have already deleted the geometry around the points, but let's have a look at what it looks like. If we do visualize the dop import node, we can see that we have a number of buildings that fit inside the city block shape, but there's a big gap, a big space in the middle. Now, you might want this or you might not, but in this part, I'm going to explain how you can fill that up. We can use a filler cluster to fill up the space in the middle. And to get a higher chance of getting buildings into the city block, I'm going to make that filler cluster consist only out of the smaller office buildings. So I'm going to leave out the ones with the big footprint. Let's jump back up to object level and let's go into our buildings node. If we zoom out, we can see that we have a switch commercial node here. We're going to copy that, Control C, Control V, and we're just going to disconnect the bigger buildings from that node. Let's remove the last building. It's quite a big footprint, this one. And attribute trait 20 should also be quite a big footprint. So let's also disconnect that from this switch, from this one. So we want to remove this line, disconnect. And that should give us just smaller buildings inside the switch. Of course, we're going to have to change the stamping expression to match that. First, let's change this name to _small. So we have a node called switch commercial small and change this expression. If I hit Alt E in there, I get a bigger window. And we can change this to commercial var small as well. All we have to do then is in this copy one node, which is in another network, we have to add that expression to make it work. Let's jump up into our building clusters node again to make these changes. Building clusters is right there. So there's a few changes we need to make. We have two inputs here for the houses and the commercial, but we're going to create a third one. So let's just copy this import commercial chain, Control C, Control V, and make that into a third input. So now if we want, we can just grab small buildings from here. So you can see that this object 1 leads to a switch commercial, but if we find our switch commercial small node, we will only have the small buildings in there. And we can now change this to 0, 1, or 2, depending on what we want to see. Right? So now we're getting the small buildings. And in the stamp node, in the copy node, we have to create a new stamp expression. So on the stamp tab, we can just expand this window a bit to make it more visible. And let's create commercial var small. Let's copy the expression from commercial var, Control C, Control V. And instead of 7 buildings, we now have 5 because we've removed 2. So the random function should only go between 0 and 4. Hit enter. And for the sake of variety, let's change 55 to 66. Doesn't really matter what number you put in there. So now we've got that done. Let's make these windows a bit smaller again. And let's run the simulation again. So if we do the copy here, we should get them all running down. Let's also hide the other objects. So now we've got the usual thing. Let's turn off all these visualizers so we only get the points in the boxes. Let's set our timeline back to 0. Double click the back arrow, visualize the dop import here, and have it run. And that creates a new cluster with only small buildings. I'm just going to quickly jump the timeline to about 480. That should give me a desired result. That should do just fine. And if we zoom out in our building clusters, we can just pipe this into a new null node. So we have the commercial and the houses clusters, but now we're going to create a new commercial cluster with only small buildings. If we visualize that null and lock it, control click this one, then that should stick in there. Yep, it does. And let's call it commercial underscore cluster underscore small, like so. Of course, you can just use any of the older clusters, but I just wanted one with smaller buildings only to increase the chance of buildings making it into that gap. So let's visualize the out cluster again, jump back up and back into our city block sim. Let's find one of our import nodes up here. Let's just Control C this node and copy it next to the ground object, Control V. And instead of city blocks, let's define this a little bit further. we're going to import just our small commercial. Here we have commercial cluster small, accept, and if we then visualize this, we should get our cluster we just created. So here's what we'll do. We have the building that we've simulated, the building cluster that we've simulated. It looks like this. And if we then overlay this block, we can see that we have some buildings that might or might not fit in. I think in this case, actually, we won't get anything in, but that doesn't matter. It depends on how the city block is seeded. So if we then look at the shape, let's visualize this one. We can see that they all fit inside. I made a little mistake. Let's shift click this so we both get to see them. Now, we can actually change this block around a bit, move it a bit to create a match. What happens is when we start simulating this entire simulation, some blocks might actually get some fillers in. Some blocks will be too small for that. But as you go around, you will get hits that are successful. So let's just cheat this one a little bit and move it so we get some inside it. Let's transform this. Normally I wouldn't do this, but it's just to illustrate the purpose on this city block. So let's find a few buildings that will definitely fit inside. That would do the trick. So that's the filler cluster transformed. Let's shift click the actual shape again. And also look at our .import node. So now we see that if we would run the system we're going to build, that this building here in the middle actually fits. The way we'll do this is we'll use the buildings that we already have as a volume and then detect which other new buildings actually fit in the middle of them. We'll do that in the next clip.